Hello, my name is John Holsizer, and this is my end of Module 2 project. Please excuse the noise in the background. I just have some family things. The first thing I'm going to talk about is classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is a type of learning discovered by Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov in the early 1900s, and it occurs when humans associate two stimuli in a way that initially neutral stimulus starts to trigger a response that was once previously triggered by another naturally meaningful stimulus. Pavlov's work began with an experiment involving dogs, which led him to uncover the principles of this learning process. I'm just going to go ahead and break down that experiment involving the dogs. In Pavlov's most famous experiment, he noticed that dogs would not just salivate when they saw food, but when they heard the footsteps of a person bringing the food. When he noticed this, simply he brought dogs in and started to repeat the experiment and things like that. He started pairing the sound of a bell, which would be a natural stimulus, with the presentation of food, which is the unconditioned stimulus, which naturally makes the dog salivate to an unconditioned response. Over time, the dogs began to associate the bell with the arrival of food. Even when Pavlov rang the bell without presenting the food, the dogs would still salivate. So anytime he brought them food, he would ring a bell. And then after he did that X amount of times, when he rang the bell and didn't bring the food, the dogs were still salivating, getting ready to eat. So the conditioned stimulus had become associated with the food, and salivation became the conditioned response. So there are a few key terms with classical conditioning. I'm just going to break those down. The first one is the unconditioned stimulus, which is a stimulus that naturally causes a response. In Pavlov's case, it was the food. And then the unconditioned response, which is a natural automatic reaction to the unconditioned stimulus, the dog salivating in a response to food. And then neutral stimulus is a stimulus that doesn't initially trigger any response. In this case, the bell. The dog initially heard the bell and it didn't do anything for it. And then there's the conditioned stimulus, which is when a neutral stimulus being paired with an unconditioned stimulus triggers a response. And then the final one is a conditioned response, which is the learned response to the conditioned stimulus, the dog's salivation in response to the bell alone. So that's 5 of those. I also have a few examples of classical conditioning in everyday life. It's not just for dogs, it can affect humans as well. The first one, and arguably the biggest one in today's society, is phone notifications. If you've ever noticed that you hear your phone's notification sound and you immediately pull out your phone and you check it, even though there's no new message. For me, I keep my phone on silent, and a lot of times I'll be walking, and when it rubs my leg while it's in my pocket, I'll feel like it's buzzing, so I'll get it out and I'll check it. In your mind, you've been conditioned to associate that sound with the reward of receiving a message, that phone or that buzz. There's also emotional responses. Many of our emotional responses are conditioned. For example, you'll hear a particular song that'll bring back strong feelings that you had tied to a memory because of you associating that music with the event. Any kind of nostalgia, a lot of times, is classical conditioning. Phobias and fears. Classical conditioning can explain how phobias develop. Someone may have a traumatic experience involving a certain stimulus, like heights. Fear response can become conditioned to heights themselves, even without the danger. Another example of that is if someone ate or drank too much chocolate milk when they were little and it caused them throw up. They may have an ill feeling towards chocolate milk from that point on. The final part of classical conditioning is called extinction. Classical conditioning can fade if the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented without the unconditioned stimulus. That process is called extinction. For example, if Pavlov had continued ringing the bell without providing the food, eventually the dogs would just stop salivating because they realized that the food was not coming anymore and the bell was irrelevant. However, it doesn't mean that the learning is going to be gone forever. Sometimes a conditioned response can suddenly reappear after some time, and that is a phenomenon known as spontaneous recovery. To kind of put a bow on things, classical conditioning is a powerful way that we learn by association. It plays a key role in shaping our behaviors, habits, and even emotions, often without us realizing it. By understanding classical conditioning, we can better grasp on why we react to certain stimuli the way we do and how we might change or unlearn certain responses over time. So, the next topic that I want to talk about is observational learning. All right. Observational learning, also known as social learning or modeling, is a type of learning that occurs by watching others and imitating their behavior. It's a concept developed by psychologist Albert Bandura, who believed that people can learn new behaviors without directly experiencing rewards or punishments, just simply by watching other people. This kind of learning plays a crucial role in our development, especially in childhood, but it also continues through our adult lives. We see observational learning in everyday life, from how we pick up social skills, language, and habits, to how we learn right from wrong. We learn good and bad behaviors just simply by watching other people around us. One of the most famous studies on observational learning is Albert Bandura's Bobo doll experiment in the 60s. If you don't know what a Bobo doll is, it's this inflatable doll that's built kind of like a bowling pin. You'll punch it and it'll pop right back up. Basically, what Bandura wanted to see was that if children would imitate aggressively just by seeing that without a reward or punishment. In the experiment, children watched a video of an adult acting aggressively towards an inflatable clown called Bobo. The adult punched the doll, threw it, and then hit it with a mallet. After watching the video, the children were placed in a room with toys, including the Bobo doll. What Bandura found intriguing was children who had watched the aggressive adult imitated the same aggressive behaviors without being told to do so. They punched it, kicked it, hit it in much of the same ways that the adult did. This experiment showed that children could learn behaviors simply by observing others without any influence or reinforcement. The experiment really revealed the power of observational learning and helped Bandura develop his social learning theory. There's 4 key processes that are kind of reinforcers of observational learning. The first one is attention. If you're not paying attention to the model, you can't notice any behavior. You can't imitate it. The more you focus on someone or something, the more likely you are to learn from it. Factors like the attractiveness, statutes, or relevance of the model can affect how much attention you give it. The next is retention. We have to retain what we observed. This means being able to mentally store the behavior and remember it later, even when the model is no longer there. Next is reproduction. Once we have remembered that behavior and retained it, we need to be able to reproduce it ourselves. This can depend on physical ability or skills. For example, watching a professional athlete perform a complex move or trick doesn't mean you can instantly do it yourselves, but you can try to imitate it. Just, be careful with what you're doing. The fourth thing is motivation. Finally, you need to be motivated to imitate the behavior. It can come from external rewards or punishments, or internal factors like wanting to fit in or impress a girl or a guy, and just achieve, a goal, a standard that you set for yourself. I do have a few examples of everyday life. I'm starting to go a little long, so I'm going to try and speed this up. You have children learning from their parents and peers. You gain basic social skills just by watching how your parents act. You can learn right from wrong from the same thing. You can learn through social media. While it's bad, a lot of the things we do learn and the practices we say and even words we say are from trends. Workplace learning, kind of the same as parents and peers. You spend a lot of time at work, especially as you get older, and you pick up traits from the people you spend most of your time with. It's that simple. And then finally, trends. That's kind of along with social media, but you do things based on what's popular. Again, wanting to fit in is one of the biggest motivators of observational learning. To wrap things up, observational learning is a fundamental way that we learn new behaviors, especially in social settings, through attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. We as humans absorb from our environment and the people around us, whether it's a child learning to speak by imitating their parents, or an adult picking up a new skill at work by watching a colleague. Observational learning shapes much of how we develop and adapt throughout life. Understanding this process helps explain how social behaviors spread and why it is so important to be mindful of the roles that we observe and, more importantly, the examples we set for others. Thank you so much for your attentiveness, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.